Welcome to Unraveling Midlife. I'm your host, Sarah Spence. Today's show is an eclipse special. The new moon is in Scorpio, and it's also a solar eclipse, though we won't have this one affecting us physically here in New Zealand. Eclipses do impact everyone on an energetic level. That's not what today's about. But do be aware that there's all sorts of hidden energetic things. Which leads me to Scorpio, which is this zodiacal sign associated with transformation, power, intensity, and hidden things. I'm joined by two panelists to discuss the topic of power and ethics and how that's currently playing out in society. We have Sasha Hope and Cara Grant with us today. Sasha Hope is passionate about creating a world full of hope, compassion, and heart-centered living through her embodiment teachings, including ecstatic dance, yoga teacher trainer, training other teachers, and a vast myriad of other inspirational content. Cara is a classical tantra teacher, author, and facilitator, focusing on deconditioning, identifying all the patterns, behaviors, and wounds that are stopping people from expressing their full potential. All of us love juicy conversations. Join us in ours. So, eclipse season, Scorpio. Who's a bit of Scorpio?
No one can see us if we're on a podcast. We put up our hand. I've got a Scorpio ascendant.
Yep.
Yeah, and I have a Scorpio sun sign. I have a lot of Scorpio energy for sure.
Great. And I'm of the generation that has Uranus and Scorpio. So there's a little bit out of planet or whatever. But yes, here we are on this Scorpio new moon. Power and ethics. Now, you guys have been delving into this a little bit recently in terms of topics. And I mean, I guess all of us have kind of mused over it in some respect since, was it 2017, around that like hashtag Me Too started coming out and people started admitting in society that there were power imbalances going on, especially in terms of the men-woman kind of thing. Power and ethics, where do we start?
Well, I can speak into that. Where to start? I know that as a woman becoming older, and so therefore coming into my power more and more, and also as someone like I'm a presenter, a facilitator, a teacher, what I've noticed in the last 3 or 4 years, I can feel, particularly because of the practices I'm doing, I can feel myself becoming more powerful. And so in that, I've really been attuning to and inquiring in and going, shit, how do I deal with this? Because I started to realize I was afraid of power. I was afraid of my own power, afraid of misusing power, afraid of abusing power, and starting to realize that if I had any, karmic patterns running that I was unconscious of or unable, that were more powerful than me per se, that they would run through the power as such, that things would become, in essence, more dangerous as I became more powerful. So it's been a big thing for me in the last 3 or 4 years as a teacher, as a woman, to really inquire into power.
I wrote a song called Power.
Ooh.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of the lyrics, like power. I denied it for so long and told myself that I was wrong. And I feel like that's how we grow up in a way. Like, I mean, parents and just doing what we do to kind of live in the society where it's not acceptable to have a tantrum in the middle of the mall, or anywhere for that, where there's other people for that matter. So yeah, we've been kind of told that we're wrong, especially as women, to actually speak out. And that's where I think the tides are turning and shifting. And yeah, a lot of that's started to come in recently in terms of I guess the kind of scenes that we, the three of us, frequent in terms of workshop facilitators, all of us being workshop facilitators in our different ways. I know that I've generally been more comfortable with female teachers and facilitators because I don't feel that the power thing, like with some men, not all men, but also some women have that kind of power thing. And Donna Fahi's book, Teaching Yoga, really covers that ethical stance of what it means to be a teacher. And I know that one of the teacher trainings that I did explicitly had as part of the ethic teacher conduct that you weren't to be in a relationship with any of your students. Like, it was clearly spelt out. And I know someone who did want to date one of these students and said, hey, I'm interested in being in a relationship with you. If you want to, like, she told me the story like this, if you want to, I can't be a teacher anymore.
Wow. What a beautiful story of transparency and honesty, and really valuing and understanding that teacher-student dynamic.
I feel like maybe it's something in society that we aren't, it's just hasn't been addressed. And so it's this whole societal shift of viewing things differently, like consent culture's coming in. Like, it's okay to say no. I mean, it's kind of a tough talk. I'm not a parent. I'm kind of really glad that I'm not. like it's just,
Yeah.
I guess every parent generation goes, wow, there's different issues to deal with than when I grew up. Yeah.
I think it's like, if I think back to when I was a teenager and when I was in my early 20s, like I was really aware entering my early 20s and starting to interact with the working world. I was so aware of the way that men perceived me as a young woman and the way that they held and wielded power. And I fucking hated it. I did not like it, but I didn't know how to deal with it. So to a degree, in some ways, I just exited. I went overseas, so I can't deal with this. I don't have the resources or the skill to deal with all of these subtle dynamics that I could feel playing out. Because I trained as a journalist, so I went and interned at newspapers and I interned at TV3. So, and I was in the newsroom and I was just like, I don't like this. I don't like the way you're looking at me. Don't like the way you're talking to me. Don't like your underlying assumptions. Don't like the dynamics here. Don't like the way you're discounting my perception of reality. But it was, I didn't feel like I could name it or that anybody would have listened to me. And it just felt like, I'm not equipped for this. I'm out. I'm going overseas. Let's go party.
Yeah. Yeah, it was interesting because I know that both of us did the going overseas thing in Canada, where it's a little bit more muted. Like, culturally, it's a little bit different in terms of that. Yeah. What's your experience, Sasha?
Although I was going to ask, is a little bit more muted, but I didn't do the going overseas things as a young woman. I was a mum, married at 22, mortgage. I did the real settling down thing. So I do wonder, like, I'm sure it was muted, but what's coming up for me is, we live in such a patriarchal conditioning world. And as a parent, what you were referring to then, I often think of, like, what were we taught about saying no? Like, no is one of the first developmental words that we learn. And what were we taught? What did we teach our children? And what did we teach our boys? And what do we teach our boys? And what do we teach our girls around saying no? It's, I guess the thing that's coming up for me is this topic is so huge. It's such a structural, on a cultural level of programming. And how do we look at that? And how do we, for me, men are suffering just as much in this dynamic where they feel it's okay to be power over, like this whole understanding of power. It's like a power over. And what was coming through before is like the feminine perspective of in and even these words, masculine, feminine, but this in power, like when we feel in our power, this ability to be able to empower others. And I don't think that's a man and a woman thing, but I think it's what we've learned about being in relationship to power. You know, what does that mean, as opposed to, we're so conditioned. I think that's why we run away from power, is because power means power over, as opposed to, as we've talked about, as women, as we get older, we feel our power. And for me, this deep yearning and desire to empower others, and I wouldn't even say empower, it's to actually just help support them to understand that the power that they have within them be underneath all of that conditioning. So that was like a big
Yeah.
It is. I mean, we're living through the product of how the world has brought us to where we are today. So it's confusing when people say, hang on, the way we're living is wrong. And then it's kind of like, well, what do we do? How do we change that? I mean, we can't just sit here and bitch about, well, this is wrong because so-and-so did this and so-and-so did that. And it doesn't work like that. This is a ginormous culture shift. Where do we take it? What's the vision? Like, and yeah.
I think what I find beneficial is, from a tantric view perspective, there's nothing wrong here. There's nothing wrong. There's just what's happening. And as you both just alluded to, this is the product of all of the conditioning, of not just on a personal level or a family level or a country level. It's like a globe. It's all of those layers of conditioning. We're living under the conditioning of the colonial mindset. You know, there's a whole layer of conditioning that's there. The patriarchy, another whole layer of conditioning. The way that we women are programmed now with marketing and stuff around anti-aging, etc. That's a whole nother layer of conditioning that never existed pre people realizing they could make a shit ton of money off, you know, playing on women's and men's fear of aging. So there's these multiple levels of conditioning, and they play out until they don't. So I think that you're asking the right question there in terms of, or the most beneficial question. It's like, if this is happening, how do we respond? And I know for me, I have to do my own work. Like, where am I conditioned? Where are my patterns playing out? Where am I out of alignment with power? And then how do I support other people to do that work, recognizing that I can only support them as far as I've done the work myself.
I suspect my astrology teacher would say, yes, that's Chiron, the wounded healer, going through eras, which is primarily about ourselves. But I don't know.
But yeah, I mean, and that's the interesting thing about living in a society that's conditioned into a highly individual perspective, right? The sense of like, oh, we have to do our individual work, and that does affect the collective field. But how do you change the construct as a whole? You know, there's so many inbuilt assumptions on how the world works that are just assumptions, right? And that's that work on the cultural level. I do think we're seeing some shifts around that with the Me Too movement. That was a huge big deal when all of those, mostly women and men, started to say, yeah, me too, and people started to go, shit, this is normal for women to be, or people to be, harassed and abused and assaulted. This is just the normal thing that happens because we live in a power over society, right? So
I think what we're talking about is also like this question of like, we can see all of this, like we're speaking to this, and how do we move through it? Like, one of the things that I've been sitting with is, like we said, we're in this collective conditioning so that these dynamics play out. We're at a point where we're, as a collective, starting to see the dynamics. And then I think the bigger question that we're asking, particularly in our community, is how do we move through it? Because we can see that the structures that are already in place they don't necessarily work. You know, they're not, it's like the patriarchal paradigm that creates these structures, and we can see, like, from that paradigm lens, it's this is wrong, this is bad, we need to punish that person. And I don't think that's that's not shifting and changing anything. And I mean, I'm still sitting with, I don't have the answers apart from having these conversations, apart from educating and having more conversations around it and talking more about it. But I still, for my own self, I certainly don't have the answer. Like you said, Carolee, like we can keep working on our own selves, and of course that ripples out. But what is the most effective way, I suppose, to start to create change?
Yes, it's awareness, and that's what we're doing. We're having this discussion going, we don't have all the answers, and maybe the people listening will think, well, I don't have all the answers either, or maybe they'll go, oh, I've got an answer. I mean, who knows, you know?
I think it
Yeah.
is beneficial too if people are listening to this kind of conversation, to recognize that if you want things to be different, the best place to start is within yourself, is to look at, well, what's my relationship to power? What are my patterns? Where am I vulnerable? Where am I susceptible? Like, I know in the past I've had a vulnerability to charismatic, manipulative, certain kinds of men because they're fucking sexy and I love them. And they're like, oh my God, you know? And then I started to realize that interacting with them wasn't necessarily beneficial. And there was suffering in that because I was lying to myself in some ways and they were deceiving me, you know, and there was this sort of self-deception and being deceived and all of that. And I just got smarter and started to see it and went, oh, okay, I got to sort this shit out. So there's always going to be those men out there. Those gorgeous, charismatic, manipulative, deceiving men are always going to be there. What do I do so that I don't get sucked in? And if I do get sucked in, how do I take responsibility and just enjoy the experience for what it is?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's some knowing agreement noises coming.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like, as we've talked about in our circles, it's something that I've watched within myself and I've watched play out at festivals, the way we are as women around powerful men. And I've seen it's like a magnet.
Of course, they're magnetic. That's it.
But yet, what I've noticed, and I wonder, I don't know if we've had this conversation, Carolia, like as facilitators in these spaces, and we also hold big space. My own experience is that it's very different for me as a woman. It's almost like people are like, I'm not sure what to do with this woman that seems to, that stands on the stage and says some things. You know, it's quite a different dynamic. It's really interesting.
I've
And I
noticed. Yeah. No, you go.
I've lost my train of thought. So you go.
Well, okay. Clearly my turn. I've noticed over the years that you can have two people that do the same thing, a man and a woman, and from the conditioning, it's often that the attention goes to the man, even if the woman is better. And I mean, that's a classic glass ceiling from corporate from God knows how long ago, but I do notice it in like yoga and music and that kind of thing as well. And I was listening, I heard on the radio that a study was done on the amount of, I think, female vocalists versus male vocalists on just on the radio in general, and it was 80% male was played. And I'm like, okay, so is it the music playing with male vocalists that means people are more used to male vocalists, so they prefer them? I personally prefer female vocalists. I always have. And so then, because the people want it, because they haven't been educated differently or had that kind of smorgasbord to see that variety, like, do we just get stuck in a particular culture because of the blinkers of, oh, well, this sells advertising, revenue? And I mean, that expands as well towards facilitators in general. Oh, here's this powerful woman standing on stage. Oh, I didn't have many powerful woman role models when I was growing up. It was all men, I mean, things have changed a bit now. There's a lot more females in leadership roles, but it is like, it doesn't really matter if it's woman or man. Like, is it embodying the masculine and not the tender masculine, like the powerful masculine, whether it's someone who's a woman or a man? No, I'm just asking the questions. Happy for you.
I love these questions, and I love what you just said too, Sasha. And I think there's a couple of factors at play. I think that some powerful, charismatic men are running a particular kind of hooking energy, it's seduction. And so they're surrounded by people after a show or a presentation because that energy is literally sucking people in. And I don't see you running that particular energy, Sasha, when you do what you do. You're powerful, you're sexy as fuck, you're up there, but you have there's a containment, right? Where that's not happening. So I think that's one factor, is that like I deliberately contain. I don't run sexual energy when I'm presenting, etc. And I can do it if I choose, and it's very, very different how I come across when I do that, but it's just not appropriate. There's no need for it in that particular setting. It would be detrimental to the body of work I'm doing. So I think that's the factor, is that some people have a seduction energy that runs, and maybe the men tend to let it run more often because maybe they feel safer. Like as a woman, I could feel quite unsafe if I run that energy, because what if I'm surrounded by throngs of people that I don't want there? Whereas I think for a man, it's like, yeah, I'm surrounded by throngs of people, and they're physically more powerful. There's a different dynamic. And I think what you're saying too, Sarah, in terms of the way that we perceive power and the way that it's like in our culture, maybe there's a part of us that is, as a whole, seeking the powerful man and afraid of the powerful woman, you see, and that kind of runs as well. So what you said, Sasha, that you sometimes feel like people don't know maybe you said that, Sarah, people don't know what to do with this powerful woman on the stage, etc., because potentially a powerful woman triggers more the feeling of not safe, whereas a powerful man might, depending if he's, might trigger a feeling of safe.
I mean, it's, and even in the world today, for some women, it's like if they don't have a husband or a man, they don't survive. And the more powerful that man, the more likely chance they'll be looked after and their children will be looked after. So, and it wasn't that long ago for us in the West that it was exactly the same, right? So of course that dynamic is there, whereas a woman, and as Sarah, you spoke to, we just don't have these models of women in power. It's not a 50-50. I think it's, like the woman leaders in the world is less than 10%. And that's leaders, and, it's starting to change and shift in other roles. Something I've noticed lately when I've dived into Netflix occasionally is, this is a little bit off topic, but there's more and more series that are coming out and films that are coming out with lead female actresses, and they're the total leads. And that's what I realized, is seeing that, is I didn't actually even realize that it was such a thing until now I'm seeing a different thing. If that makes sense. It was what I grew up with. It was always the male lead actor, and now I'm like, wow, this is so cool. And even for me as a woman that feels relatively empowered in the world, seeing these women and their stories play out, in the role, it's empowering for me. That's what I'm noticing, which is a really beautiful thing to witness, starting to see those subtle changes starting to come more and more on board. But I do think we've still got a long way to go.
I've been noticing that too, and really being happy about it. So yeah, the culture changes slowly coming in. Yeah.
Ditto. Netflix, man, I noticed the same thing. I'm like scrolling through, when it's the older movies, it's like men. I'm like, where the fuck? And then the newer ones, like, oh, way more women, and not just women acting, but women actually. Was it maybe the Queen's Gambit? I watched one particular series and I'm like, this feels different. This has a different lens on life. And then when I looked into it, it was a woman director, a woman writer, woman production crew. And I'm like, oh my God, the way they were perceiving her journey as a woman wasn't through a man's perspective. It was like, this is new. And then I'm like, what the, why, like you said, Sasha, why so long to get to this point?
Well, some of us are ahead of the times, right? Be the early adopters and pull everyone over.
Yeah. So then is it our responsibility then as women to claim our power to be in, and not, and to claim power from a clean perspective, not a power over perspective, because there is all of this conditioning, like men aren't going to hand it over necessarily.
Yeah.
Right.
I think
some would. I
Yeah.
think some would. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's also what you spoke to, Carolia, and this thing of, I think it's also important to talk to, like we've talked a lot about the masculine dynamics, but also what you were touching on, Carolia, like the female, the female has her shadow as well. And we also see that, like, the woman that will intentionally also run their eros to get what they want in the world. Like, how many Instagram yogi photos of women in bikinis and like booty shots, and I've certainly gone, maybe I just need to do that to like
Totally. Let's get some more followers.
I mean, I'm very clear. It's like I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
But it is a noticing, and I'm also, I mean, I teach work around sensuality, and I think it is a beautiful thing to have in our being and to be connected with, and to navigate the world from this feminine perspective of feeling the ability to create from ease and pleasure, and being mindful of how we're using that and not manipulating that, and not like ass shots and bikini shots, and so that's a lens as well. I'm not saying that that is wrong, but also witnessing when the female, when women pull that out as well, because we have as much shadow in these arenas as men, I think, can. The potential is there, especially as we see more women step into power. We're also going to see these dynamics play out.
Totally agree. Like, I've been reflecting in the last week on my journey with men and sexuality, and I'm like, oh shit, here's me using my sexuality to get this guy who actually really genuinely liked me. Like, he had a heart connection, I just had a sexual connection. I didn't care, went the sexual connection with him, broke his heart. And I'm like, oh, this is me in my shadow, using sexual power in my youth and not caring about the man's heart. Not cool. And I was unaware of it at the time, and just keen to get it on because he was hot and it made me feel good.
I've certainly done lots of that in my younger years as well. And I think, like, I've been reflecting on this lately too. Ultimately, I know for me personally in my younger years that I used my sexual energy to outsource my masculine. It was like I didn't meet my dad till I was 14, so I've had to work really hard on my father wound and my relationship with him. We get on really well now, but what I realized is I was outsourcing that. It was like, please love me and I'll use my sexuality to get what I need. And I think it comes back to what you were saying, Carolia, like this inner work of understanding these patterns of why we're doing what we're doing. And we're also going to make mistakes in that, and we're going to slip and we're going to trip, and then having that, like you said, Sarah, the awareness of it there, and having community that can lovingly go, do you think that's the best thing, that thing that you're doing?
It's like, whoop, there's a little, I see your shadow showing, there's your shadow.
And that's okay, because we love you, and we all have it.
Yeah, it can be quite a perfectionistic society, especially with social media. And
You just framed that, Sasha, is beautiful. The ways in which any or all of us have used our sexuality to get our needs met. Right. And so if we look at people like, I don't really know the story of Harvey Weinstein, etc., and all the stuff that went down, but just as an example of a man in a position of power that used to lord it over and seduce, the young actresses, etc., he would have been meeting his whatever unconscious needs. It wouldn't have been just about sex per se or just about power. There was something in that where he was doing the best he could to meet the needs in a way that was harmful to others.
I've been listening to a bit of Gabor Mate lately, and his you know, those of us that know Gabor Mate, he talks a lot about trauma, but he's coming in, I was hearing him speak, which I really love. It's not only what has been done to you, so say we've come from childhood trauma, it's also what was not done to you. And this is coming back to that societal thing, like just in general, you know, in our generation and generations previous, our parents were taught not to pick us up when we cried, you know, so it's not necessarily a big trauma, but it's a need that is not met. Simple things like my voice, my needs, my cries are not going to be met. So this patterning that gets done, laid in our subconscious, and then we begin to play it out as an adult. Well, like, how can I get my needs met, and how can I, you know, so it starts. I really love that framework of what he's saying, is it's not only what happened to us, it's also the needs that we didn't get met from a very early age, like from the birth story to the very early years in our life of how we were met. And most of us were not met in the ways that we were needed to be met because of the society that we live in.
True that. So we're back to the dance.
So then we will use our power. What's that?
We're back to the dance, of like recognizing this is just what's happening. It's always been happening. We're more aware of it. Can we dance it with love and lightness whilst doing less harm?
That's right. Yeah. And then I think what happens is, can we do that? And those of us that, like, say, like Harvey Weinstein, like, who knows what happened to him in his childhood? And then I think what happens is when people get into positions of power, they have even more impact to play out those unmet needs on a much greater scale, creating way more harm.
So I know that a lot of the talk about facilitation these days, especially if it's in neo-tantra or like sensuality, sexuality kind of sense, is talking about the facilitator being trauma informed. Do either of you guys know much about that, given that you probably can't somewhat work in those spaces a little bit, especially being a yoga teacher and teaching teachers of yoga? I'm looking at you, Sasha.
Yes, the short answer is yes. I certainly don't call myself a trauma expert, and intention, like, yes, I've trained in trauma and understand how to hold trauma in an embodiment space. And I think when we're holding containers that we know is going to bring up emotion, I think it's really important for us as facilitators to understand normal emotional release, or I wouldn't even say normal, what's normal, emotional release and a trauma response, and knowing what to do with it when it arises more than anything. Because the reality is trauma can be triggered. It just can be triggered, and sometimes it can be, you can be really mindful with your languaging and invitational and letting people know what's going to happen within the container, like setting up those safe containers from a trauma-informed lens, and things are still going to come up. And I think it's really important as a facilitator to know how to manage that. And there was definitely been conversation in our community of how do we manage that in a festival? What do we do? What do we do if that comes up, and is there a safe space, and can we create safe spaces a festival is different, right, to a teacher training, and where you've got your assistants and you know what's going to happen and you can keep an eye on that person and really take care of them, as opposed to, this is one of the conversations that came up, is it safe in a festival setting where trauma can be opened up, and then what? Because often people are just left to their own devices. So I think, coming back, I think it's really important as a facilitator to have, you don't need to go and do a whole, I believe you don't need to go and do like a whole 3-year education into trauma, but I think it's really wise for yourself as a facilitator to do some education, and there's lots of education out there at the moment around this.
Similar to what Sasha said, in terms of when I'm leading bodies of work, the expectation is, I know trauma is going to come up. Of course it's going to come up, because of the nature of the work that we're doing is purification of the mental, emotional realm and the energetic realm, which is where the stuff gets stored. So I'm working both with a classical tantric understanding of how of trauma, and I've also studied it from the Western medical model as well, plus direct experience. And I would say that, you know, any facilitator or teacher who is doing any body of work that has the ability to open people up into that stuff needs to know how to hold it, because there's a responsibility. You might have all the skills to open people up into intensity and catharsis and let's go. But if you don't have the skills to hold them and to bring them back into integration and to bring them back into a regulated nervous system, you got no fucking right taking them into openness like that, you know. And when it comes to festivals, like when I present at festivals, I teach in a particular way so that I'm minimizing the risk that people are going to go into that level of conditioning and trauma release, etc., because it is not the right space. I don't have the capacity or the capability to necessarily work with someone in the same way that I do when I'm in a container. I mean, in a container, I've got 12 to 18 people maximum at the moment. So I can attend to everyone. I can see where their nervous system is. I know if they've gone into disassociation or they're starting to have a PTSD reaction, and can work with that. But festivals, man, you got 100 people in the room. Like, yeah, can be aware of them all, but if shit starts popping off, can I deal with it all? Probably not, you know. So I think that from a festival perspective, the conversations that I've been having is we need spaces, like a space at a festival that is consistently held. So there's people who are holding that space, you know, all the way through, where anyone having a bad trip, bad relationship stuff, getting blown open in a workshop, freaking out because they've never been to a festival before, they can come to that space and be held and just get into some nervous system regulation, basically, and have some context for their own experience. And I think that's the way to do it, is to have these particular sanctuaries at a festival, and everyone knows where they are. Everyone knows that's where you go. And it's a bit of a backstop, because people are walking out of workshops at festivals blown wide open, freaking out. And, you know, that's without all the drugs. I mean, we don't see that many drugs in the festivals we go to, which is great. But I think it's a big piece of the picture. And the festivals I've been going to haven't had that before, haven't recognized the need for it. And I think they're starting to recognize, oh, we need to do this, because the work feels like it's getting more powerful. People are breaking open faster and quicker from small things. Just being in a festival environment is enough to break people down into their trauma, let alone going into a workshop.
Especially after the last couple of years not really being around a huge amount of people. And then I've always been super social, and I get to a festival and go, okay, it's been a few hours, I need to go and be by myself in the tent for a while.
Yeah, I think that's a real thing.
It's a real thing. And I love what you spoke to, Carolia, around, you didn't say it in these words, but I invite people that are holding space to really feel into this, to teach what's in front of you, you know, like you say, like to the setting, like you're at a festival, there's so many people. I think we can go in with these preconceived, like, this is my workshop, this is the structure of it, and not necessarily shifting and changing to the environment that you're in, and is that appropriate right here and now? Because we know as facilitators how deep we can take people, but like you say, when it's a lot of people, you know, teaching to the midline of the group, as opposed to, I'm here to like transform and take everybody, even the people that are like, this is their first time, and just doing some breath work is really radical for them. And like you say, is going to create that dysregulation and that disassociation, and, you know, all of those things in the nervous system. And we just don't have the capacity afterwards to be able to hold them. So it's much more responsible to teach what's in front of you, teach to the midline. Yeah.
I like that. I think also, Sarah, what you said in terms of, we've, you know, just had the 2 years or so that we've had, as a whole, society is becoming more and more traumatized, right? The way that society functions the levels of mental health issues, et cetera, et cetera. All of this is reflection of, like, remembering trauma is not about what happened to you. It is about how your system interpreted and put meaning on and digested or did not digest what happened to you. And so it's like there's this compounding impact happening where people don't have the tools, the context, or the understanding to digest fully their experiences. And we've had so many traumatic experiences as a whole, the whole trauma of vaccine mandates, et cetera, et cetera. That's a whole trauma that needs to be addressed as a country. That's just on top of all the other traumas that this particular land has lived through in the last however many 100 years.
It's almost like the universe always has to have some kind of a generational trauma, and in other parts of the world they've been having traumas over and over. I remember going to the Red Cross Museum in Geneva, and I only went because it was the only thing open on a Sunday, because nothing's open on the Sunday, and I'm so glad I went. I looked at this map and it showed a timeline of wars and locations in the world, and it showed me that at any one time there's always like 100 wars going on Earth. And I thought, how lucky are we that we haven't had a war since, I don't know, grandparents' generation. But we've had this. It's a different kind of thing. And I mean, there have been wars. There's been, you probably know some people from former Yugoslavia, for example. That kind of starts to impact us a little bit. But we've been so lucky. And now we've had these events that just, I mean, everyone's going to be, there was life before that, and life's different after that. Interesting.
Yeah, and I feel like one of the pieces that I've noticed is when trauma arises, I sort of said we don't know when it's going to arise, but often actually it's when things start to settle and when we start to feel safer. And I think we're going to see more and more of it arising, like you spoke to, Carolia, is like as people are like, okay, we made it through to some degree of that, then it's kind of like, and what we didn't have the resources, the tools to digest, it's going to come up, because that's ultimately, we're here to evolve, and the body will bring it up for us to look at. And have we got the resources, the tools, the support? And as space holders, we are part of that, guiding people to build the resources within themselves to, as you said, Carolia, to digest what it is that they couldn't at the time. Like, we only have so much capacity, right, to process at certain times. Because it takes time to process. That's the thing. And we have these lives that we have to keep moving.
I know when I came home from overseas, like I worked freelancing, whatever, but I didn't work very much because I needed the time to process what I lived through awakening psychosis, etc. Needed the time. It's something else is like when things get locked away in the body, it takes energy out of our energy body. And as the energy body starts to lose vitality, lose energy, it can digest less. So then more stuff gets locked away. And so more energy is getting locked away, so it can digest less. So there's like this compounding situation that starts to happen. Fortunately, it works in the other direction as well. That when we digest something that's stuck in the system, it will release that energy back into the energy body. And then we have more capacity to digest the next thing, and more capacity and more capacity. And one of the beautiful things about that process is that if you're working with a practitioner, their energy body kind of like hooks into your energy body in the same way that the nervous systems will co-regulate. And so the capacity of their energy body will support you to digest what's there, that then releases the thing back into your energy body, so you get more capacity. So I think that's a part of what we're seeing too, is that people's capacity to digest, they're just clogged the fuck up. Like the shit is clogged up,
It's constipation.
So much constipation, like seriously, so much.
And I also think we live, sort of going back to the beginning of our conversation, we live in a world and a society where we're so conditioned to keep doing, and like we see it, processing takes time. And it's this thing is we're not we often feel like we should be doing, and actually I call it the non-doing space. Like, can we allow ourselves to be in the non-doing space? Because as you said, when we take the time to non-do or to sit and process, it actually frees our energy up a lot more, so we have more energy then. But it's sometimes we're so taught just to keep pushing on, to keep driving on, and that's for all of us, men, women, giving ourselves permission to pause, to take a moment to really notice what is happening, as we've said, come back to again and again this thread of awareness, like what is really happening for me right
Yeah.
now. Mm, mm,
Yeah.
mm,
And this ties in, just to loop it back too, because I'm just aware of time as well. It ties into like understanding traumas create patterns, patterns create dynamics, dynamics create suffering, right? So that when we're able to go in and digest the trauma, we're more likely then to start to interrupt the patterns, the dynamics that are causing the suffering. So we've been giving our power away, externalizing our power, giving it away to men, and unconsciously or in a non-beneficial way, using seduction energy to try and get what we want, like all of that stuff. When there's the healing of the traumas, those patterns can start to drop away. And what I noticed in my own life is I started to get attracted to different kinds of people. I'm like, whoa, you're a different type. I haven't been attracted to your type before, because the patterns are changing. You see, the patterns are changing. So when it comes to power and ethics, I think noticing what you're vulnerable to, what pattern runs in you that means that you're vulnerable to a certain kind of external person, and having that awareness so that you can mitigate. If you start to interact with the person like that, it can be like, wait a second, I know this pattern, I know this type, I know it leads to this kind of suffering. I might choose something different.
Yes. Yes. And I'd like to, it's like, it's that, and as we know, like there's also this, we also need these guidelines in place, like you spoke to, Sarah, like Donna Fahy speaks to so beautifully, as she's so clear on her ethical teachings. It's like doing the inner work ourselves, but also having these guidelines in place to go, hey, that what's happening there, that dynamic is not okay, or that is something that Carolia and I have been working on in the background, and as you know, Sarah, is reaching out to festival organisers and asking if they'll put a code of conduct and ethics in, so when facilitators get accepted, they read through it, so that they're also educating themselves, because they might have come through a pathway that like it's there in yoga. You would hope any yoga training that you're getting taught about ethics, but I'm not sure. There's a lot of other modalities that are coming in. Is it taught in the breath work? Is it taught in the cacao offering? I'm sure it's taught in your lineage as well, Carolia, with the classical tantra, which is part of my teachings as well. But it's both, right? The inner work and also these structures and this education.
Yeah, absolutely agree, for sure. And just makes sense. Don't have sex with your students, because it's going to lead to karmic entanglement, which will probably lead to suffering, and probably the person with the least amount of power is going to experience the most amount of suffering.
And I think
that in a nutshell.
Yeah, and even like what we've spoken to, it's not even sex with your students. It's energetic. It's playing and using your power to outsource your needs, right? And it's going to cause more pain and suffering for yourself and for those around you.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I want to emphasize that in its most gross form, like gross as in physical, it's sex. But there's so many other ways, going all the way down to the subtle, where a teacher or a facilitator will play games and get their needs met by energetically, And what I'm noticing is that some of those facilitators, teachers, presenters, they don't have the subtle awareness to even recognize or be aware of what they are doing. For them, it's invisible. So they feel like they're doing nothing wrong. They're like, what am I doing? I'm not doing anything wrong. It's like, So yeah, you're running this whole sort of energetic like thing. They don't feel it. They don't know.
Well, that's why we call it shadow, right?
I have a little shadow that goes in and out with me.
Because I can't see it.
Yeah.
And we all have that, right? We all know, those of us that do our work, we're like, until you don't see it until you see it, and then you're like, oh gosh.
Yeah.
Oh, that feeling, hey. You're like, no, seriously? I've been doing this all my life. Oh.
Self-compassion. Yeah. Well, I mean,
Yeah.
I hope that my peers, colleagues, friends, yes, looking at the two of you, I really hope that shit gets pointed out to me, and like I'm open and I want to receive that and do the work around it. Not all people want to have shit pointed out to them, even when they're in leadership positions,
Or especially, and I'm thinking more of the mainstream, the business world, corporate. I mean, you get leaders in any setting who have the humility to be able to take that on, and you know when you've met someone like that. And then there's the no, we can't upset the apple cart, but really the apple cart has like rotten apples, and the whole cart's gonna like end up having to be binned, Yeah. So many juicy things to contemplate.
Indeed, yeah. It's such a vast topic, and we're only really just touching the surface, and like we said, more conversations around it, more questioning and curiosity from the not knowing space of like, how do we bring this into more awareness? How do we lovingly have conversations around this? And how do we vision a new way of the world being around power and people in leadership roles?
Love it. Love all those questions. We're coming into festival season, so we've got a really good opportunity as a community to A, bring in the code of ethics, B, bring in the sanctuary spaces, have the conversations together, and to lovingly name when we see things that maybe need to have attention drawn to, and I would love to see more of the men doing this too, brothers, when you see your brothers acting in ways that are manipulative or coercive or an abusive power, etc., have the courage to name it with that brother. And if you feel uncertain, get another brother with you, so there's two of you, right? Because I know it's freaking scary to call, I don't want to say call someone out, it's scary to say, hey, I'm seeing this and it's concerning me, but we need to do it. We can't be scared to speak up anymore. Like, that's what I feel like. It's like we need to be able to speak into what we see. Hey, I see this, I'm seeing this, and see that too.
I think one of the tools that I've learned along the way with peer feedback, and it's something I teach my students on my trainings, is peer-to-peer feedback. And one of the things is, like, firstly, speak to what you love about what they do well. Someone's going to take feedback much more if they're not feeling attacked, if they feel safe. So one of the things is, what do you see they're doing well? And phrase it in a way that's like a question, as opposed to again, like a pointing out an attack. It's like, this is what I love about what you're doing, and there's this piece that I'm not sure about, like, where are you coming from? So that could be, for those of you who feel brave enough to start to step up and have those conversations, because as you said, Carolee, I think it's really important. It's like they say, it takes a whole community to raise a child. I think it's going to take a whole community to start to begin to shift and change. And that's one of the ways that I've felt helpful to come into difficult conversations, is like, this is what I'm loving, and that helps us drop into heart space straight away. This is what I'm loving. And this is the curiosity, the question that I'm having. And then sometimes it might be like, and then this is, we might need to get a bit more direct. Yeah.
Sometimes people don't hear the curious questioning, but I love that you're teaching it like that, because I remember one of the trainings I did, you said something positive, you said something they could work on, then you said something positive again, and I was so excited about learning this. It was a while ago, right? And then I said that to someone, and they're like, are you dealing me a shit sandwich? Oh, not unintentionally.
Yeah.
Praising tone, questioning, absolutely. Yeah, it's great. Well, with that, yes, Scorpio is the representative of hidden things, really, as well. Wow, Pluto probably the ruling planet of Scorpio. But we are doing the uncovering. So thank you very much for our time together, having a bit of a chat and a contemplation about all these parts of power and ethics and how that plays out in lives. Yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you, Sarah and Sasha.
Thank you both, beautiful woman, and beautiful to spend some time with you on a Monday afternoon approaching the Scorpio new moon.
Yeah, get it in there quick in the dark of the moon so that we can serve it up. Unraveling Midlife is brought to you from Aotearoa, New Zealand by www.sarahmarlowspence.com. Theme music is by Sarah Marlowe Spence and Sarasvati Marie Willis, and art by Samantha Hepburn.